Testing. Welcome everybody. My name's Shane Whittington. I am the country manager for modulyss, and I welcome you all here today on day one of Clerkenwell. This is our first speech, first talk by Samantha. I've just prepared a little something just to read to you all before we get started. So welcome to the Modulyss showroom. Modulyss is a brand that designs and produces soft flooring solutions with a strong focus on design, well-being and sustainability. Today we invite you to look beyond the surface of sustainable design and explore a question that has become increasingly urgent in our industry. What does transparency really mean? So in a world where sustainability claims are everywhere, transparency is not a given. It requires critical thinking, open dialogue and a willingness to change both data and processes. This talk is about the role architects play in that shift, how they can question what is presented to them, influence supply chains and ultimately drive more accountable design decisions. We're delighted to welcome Samantha Allen, who is the Associate Director at M Moser Associates. With global experience and accreditations in WELL, LEED and BREEAM, she brings deep expertise in sustainability and healthy buildings, working across projects that integrate well-being, ESG strategies and environmental responsibility at scale. Through real project insights, Samantha will challenge us to rethink transparency, as this is shared responsibility between architects and manufacturers. So Samantha, the floor is yours.
Great.
Thank you.
I was getting nervous. Thank you, Shane. I always get nervous when someone uses my full name. Usually means I'm in trouble. I usually go by Sam. So if you catch me afterwards, please don't say Samantha, it'll make me jump. Right, so we're going to talk about transparency in sustainable design and what that sort of means, where we're at today. And at the end, I'm going to have a little ask of all of you of how we get to move this forward. So where we are today, when we talk about transparency, really it's about kind of the checkbox exercises, right? It's about marketing claims that we want to put out there into the world. We're a lot on the certification schemes and on spec sheets and data and information that comes in a nice, neatly little packaged component. However, what we're being asked for, at least from our clients, is a little deeper than that. We're being asked for auditable data, traceable supply chains from the raw material extraction all the way through to the end of life and what that looks like. And the reason for that is because they want reportable outcomes. A lot of the companies that we work for, a lot of our clients have big ESG targets that they need to meet, and they need to be able to demonstrate that in real numbers. So how is this moving along? In terms of ESG, a year ago even, 5 years ago certainly, it was enough to have a narrative, a nice little story that we could put down. That's no longer really enough. We're moving to disclosure frameworks. The EU has come out with CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, and there are others that are moving fast across the industry in different regions in different countries. In terms of carbon, it was okay to have estimates. And one could argue that a lot of EPDs and actually what we see as a carbon number today are still estimates to an extent, but it's moving towards accounting. It's no longer just, I think it's around this. We can't use ROMs anymore. We need a hard number at the end of the day. And then in terms of materials, having those declarations, usually self-declared, to actual traceability, to third-party verification. So change is coming, and it's going to be in the numbers. So in terms of this, I wanted to talk briefly about digital product passports. Who's heard of the ESPR before? Okay, so this is a massive directive that has come through and will be regulation across Europe. So manufacturers, modulyss included, sell across Europe, and they will need to be compliant with this. The first set of product categories will likely include textiles. However, there is also the construction products regulation, and so that will be various other build materials that will come into place that will need to be reported on. But there's a lot of confusion around what it actually means. They have not released official timelines of which products will need to be reported on or have a digital product passport when. And also, no one really knows what a digital product passport looks like yet. So everyone is creating their own, which leads to issues with comparability. And then finally, in terms of a UK position, because that's where we are, last I checked, we need UK manufacturers mostly sell in Europe, so they will need to comply with this. The UK is also looking to maybe have its own DPP regulation, similar to how they're copying all of the other EU regulations since we left the EU. But yeah, we'll see what happens there. Watch this space. So the way that designers are thinking about material selection, product selection is changing. Aesthetics used to be king. No longer is that the case. So now things need to be on an even playing field because we're being asked for different types of data. We're no longer just being asked for a purple wall. We're being asked for a purple wall that uses paint that performs a certain way under different lighting conditions, that will have color fastness, durability, and also has certain sustainability criteria. We need to know VOC content, for example. So when it comes to sustainability, these are the things that we are trying to focus on and get, at least at M Moser, our designers to really understand what's important when it comes to these metrics. So embodied carbon, that's essentially the carbon that goes into a physical product. There's operational carbon, what that energy is being used once a product is in place. This is usually for equipment, so hopefully carpet won't have too much operational carbon going on once it's installed. That would be weird. And then toxicity, so VOCs, SVOCs as well. So those are not the ones that are going to release immediately, but can release over a longer period of time. Various other well-being impacts, so things like glare, circadian rhythm, when we're talking about lighting fixtures, as well as neurodiversity, which there are a lot of really great talks on neurodiversity and design this Clerkenwell, so I would check out some of those. And then recyclability. What are we thinking about in terms of end of life? So what can we do? So here are the things that designers can actually impact in a project. I figured, as we're in modulyss, it would be wise to talk about flooring first. So with flooring, as I mentioned, the DPP requirement will likely come to things like flooring first because it falls under the textile category. And that we're expected to report next year, despite the fact that they haven't said, yes, this is absolutely happening. Just watch the space, as I said. But the risk areas for this is embodied carbon, so it can be high. Flooring usually covers quite a large part of a project. VOCs, not so much from the tiles themselves, but from the adhesives. I hate glues. Don't use them, please. Stop with the glues. Don't glue things down. It makes it very hard for sustainability. And then recycled content. And what we look for in these are in terms of traceability is an EPD. Floor score, for example, that's a very strong VOC scoring tool, and declare labels and cradle to cradle, which many of the modulyss products have. So wall finishes, things like paints, acoustic finishes also to walls, the construction of the walls themselves. This is going to likely be phase 2 of the ESPR, so early 2030s that we're going to be expected to start to see DPPs on the walls, even within the construction of a wall. So you're not going to be able to see the DPP, which is a question for a later date. But VOCs, off-gassing, acoustic foams, those types of things that can really sort of make an impact. And then sealing systems. Again, it covers a large proportion and space of a project, so that's something that you want to pay attention to. Moving on, furniture. This is obviously a really big one. I know I've lumped it into one category, so apologies. It does get quite complicated, but we are expected to have furnitures need to report on DPPs very soon. We are seeing a lot of companies do that because they might fall under the textile category. And because there's so much variability and we all want to have things that are bespoke and a little bit nicer, this is where it starts to get a bit complicated. So we'll see what happens here. And equipment. Although as designers we don't often specify MEP, we might in terms of diffusers and how they look, for example, but we usually specify equipment like refrigerators, dishwashers, kettles, IT equipment sometimes, and those are all going to have an impact on the operational carbon. So we're going to need to provide two pieces of information that are quantifiable for that. One is the embodied carbon of those physical elements. TM65 is the one that we use for MEP equipment, but we don't have a good equivalent for calculating embodied carbon for a lot of the electrics that go into a space. Some of them are getting there. IT/AV seems to be a little further ahead. And we are seeing a reduction in embodied carbon with things like power over Ethernet. Hands up, who knows what that is? Okay, not too bad, but very few people. So it means that we can use one cable that provides both data and power. So we're essentially reducing from two cables down to one. And if in a regular office space, I kid you not, there could be hundreds of miles of wiring. So this is something that can really make a big impact. And then, of course, there's the operational carbon that's associated with everything that we're specifying there. So really, we're looking at energy efficiency and water efficiency. Although the focus is on energy and carbon right now, the next big wave that is going to hit us is water scarcity. And that's something that we're going to need to pay attention to and focus on right now. And then finally, lighting and controls. This is a bit of a tricky one. I heard recently that the lighting and controls industry have figured out a way to game declare labels. No names. But because these are self-report and you can essentially say metal as an entire category and not which metal, and as we know, many metals can be toxic, they can still get a declare label despite the fact that they might have toxic metals contained within them. So this is an area that we need to be watching out for. Check with your suppliers, ask for the ingredients. I know the ingredients of a light sounds really strange. You're not trying to make soup with it, but you still need to know what's inside because that could have an impact, not necessarily for the health of the occupants for the space that you're designing for now, but when you come to the end of life, how that's then going to be used, how it could be recycled, the e-waste that might be generated from that, that's going to play a big role. So these are all the ways and major categories that I think if we focus on those and get as much information as we can, then we're moving in the right direction. So this isn't meant to scare you too much, but I just wanted to show what a life cycle of carbon really looks like. So when we're usually what we actually get when we get a carbon value for a product is just this light purple box here. We don't get any of this information, right? So this is what's known as cradle to gate. Who's heard of that term before? Good, okay, brilliant. So this is cradle to grave, and this is cradle to gate, because that is to the factory gate. Now, the majority of carbon emissions do tend to come from the raw material extraction. Then there's transport to the factory, and then there's the manufacturing processes as well. And so the energy that's used to manufacture a product will get captured in this bucket here. But I'll get back to this point later because it shows that there are so many different processes along the way, along the chain, that where we add carbon and we add a footprint to a product. It's not just at the beginning. So, what does the data reveal when we actually try to do carbon accounting? Who here has done carbon accounting on a project? Ooh, 1.5 people. There was a wobbly hand at the front for those who missed it. So, when you actually try to do carbon accounting on a project today, you're going to find a few things a bit wonky. And the problem with that is there are significant gaps in product level data. There is inconsistent assumptions between different EPD measures and different providers of those EPDs. For those of you who don't know, and I should have said this earlier, my apologies, an EPD is an environmental product declaration, and it gives you the carbon value. It gives you other information as well, and you usually have to scroll through about 20 pages to find the one number that you need. But that's essentially what it is, and that's what will give you that carbon value. And then data quality at the input level, it directly determines the outputs, but it's not always going to be accurate. So we find a lot of missing things. Usually if we can get 10 to 15 products, that's it, on a project that have an EPD, we feel pretty good about ourselves. There was once a director that I had who asked, why don't we do a project where it's all EPDs? And I nervously laughed for about 5 minutes because this is what happens. There is so much missing data. We tried to do it briefly, but it turned out to be pretty impossible. Now, that might be different. That was 5 years ago. So I'd like to talk a little bit about, oh yes, question.
Yeah, sorry, going back to, you mentioned, okay, if you have to go to an EPD,
Yeah.
20 pages and then there's one number that you actually
Yes.
use. What number is that, please?
So the carbon footprint is what I was referring to specifically for that. So that would be listed in the EPD as global warming potential. So there are many different greenhouse gases that warm the planet, but there used to be a massive database of carbon, methane, nitrous oxides, all of these different gases were listed, and all of them had a factor of how much it was warming the Earth by. And that was a bit overwhelming. So what the climate scientists decided to do was to basically give a common denominator of carbon, CO2, as the main, because it is still the main contributor to global warming. And so every other gas or every other element that contributes to global warming has a carbon dioxide equivalent. So for example, methane, one unit of methane, so 1 ton of methane, has 4 times the warming impact on the Earth to 1 ton of carbon. But everything is given in terms of carbon now. So that's why we talk about carbon accounting.
And do you look at total or biogenic or fossil or all of it?
Usually we look at total, yeah.
A1, A3 or A1, B?
So usually what we get is A1 through A3. If we can get A1 through A5, that at least gets us to the project. However, what we usually do is we take A1 through A3, and then we get A4, which is the transport of the product from the factory to the space. And we're able to use transport data for that. And then the installation is usually the electricity or the time on site of people to actually do the install. So that's how we get to A4 and A5 for a project.
Thank you.
Yeah. And that's only still the first part. Okay, so I'm going to talk about a project that we recently completed, and we're still actually working on the sustainability certifications because they wanted so many. They wanted to be, the ambition was really small. It was, minor. They wanted to be the most sustainable and the smartest office in the entire world. Casual. So we offered them a series of sustainability certifications, thinking they were going to pick 1 or maybe 2, LEED and WELL, the usual. And they said yes to all of them. So we are in the process of delivering LEED, WELL, the WELL Health Safety Rating, the Zero Carbon certification from the International Living Future Institute, They also do the Living Building Challenge. That was their big thing before, but no one could do it, so they released other ones. The Global Universal Design Commission Guidelines, which is a US-based universal design program for accessibility, and Blue Standard, which is all about oceanic health and basically it's about getting rid of single-use plastics. So we estimated through the course of their lease that we were going to have $4 million in savings because of the reduction in operational energy. And the reason for that is the New York specifically has a local law 97, which mandates that taxes increase the more energy you use. The higher that your EUI gets, the greater your taxes, and that increases every year. So the EUI goes down and the taxes increase. So that's how we estimated that. They have a tool online that you can just plug data into and it gives you a number, which is quite helpful. And then we integrated a digital twin, IoT, and AI capabilities into interactive dashboards. This was mostly to help with neurodiverse populations within the space so that they could choose maybe acoustically more quiet spaces if they were feeling a little overstimulated or understimulated, like myself. I need to be in loud, vibrant places to get anything done. And then we also saw a reduction in their real estate as well. So they're getting a buy with a lot more on a lot less land. I mean, it's upper land, but you get what I'm saying. So this was we saved about 70% in structural materials by optimizing the slab design. So we really cut down on the partitions. And then also, we had 53% lower carbon partitions generally through selection of those materials. We focused on the big ticket items, partitions. Anything flat is a big ticket items. Walls, like floors, walls, ceilings. This area is the big ones. If you're going to focus on just three, focus on those. And then we had a carbon smart procurement process. We basically told the design teams we had it getting written into the tenders for the general contractor. This is really important that you get it into the tender, that all products must have at least a VOC certificate and one other sustainability credential, preferably an EPD. And yeah, that was how we got there. So this is kind of the results of that. So there was a 26% reduction in total embodied carbon versus the baseline. So this is the total. Flooring, we had 18%. Partitions is really where we made the biggest difference. Wall finishes, it's quite challenging to still do wall finishes. Ceilings, a significant percent, and then structurals also quite significant for the space. And this was to help them align with their net zero goals to achieve the zero carbon certification, which I highly recommend looking into because they now have a tenant scheme. They did not at the time, and we were on the phone to them about every week trying to figure out what it meant for us. So there are two types of impact, but both are in your hands. So there's the embodied side. It's about 50% of all building emissions by 2050 will be embodied carbon. And then in terms of after occupancy, what we're really focusing on, at least in terms of the data, is indoor environmental quality. So that's not just air quality, but that's acoustic performance, that's lighting levels, not just in terms of heat gain, but also in terms of glare. You're designing for people at the end of the day, so they need to be comfy. And then these are revealed by various other things. So it's about tracking that data throughout, which I know sounds like a lot, but it's okay. So both of these are kind of invisible. They're more felt or written on a piece of paper as a number that is not particularly tangible like this. You can't go and point to it. You can't go touch it. But both are auditable, and both are your choice. So the data exists. Here's where the real problems are. But it's not comparable, usually across products or suppliers. They're not verified against independent standards often. Usually it's self-declared. And then they're not carried throughout all of the project stages. So decisions tend to revert to cost. We all have had that experience where we feel really good about the sustainable products that we've put into a scope that get VE'd at the last minute. And then there's no evidence at the end of the day, but it's not there yet. There is hope, don't worry, I promise. So certifications still matter. It's important that these are more third-party verified. These are a bunch of product certifications. It's probably about a quarter of the ones out in the market. And these are a bunch of building ones as well. So there's lots of guidance out there. I would stick to one and just kind of go with that. A lot of them are quite comparable. So one that I wanted to talk about, because it actually is a modulyss certified one. I'm going to pass this around so everyone can have a look. The latest, Halio. Oh, no! Sorry, folks. I don't know what happened there. Oh, no. Okay. Yes, is cradle to cradle. This is third-party verified, and it covers a whole range of different criteria. So you're not just looking at one piece of information, but if you can get products with that, you know that it has been benchmarked against each of these categories, which is where real value gets derived. And it focuses on continuous improvement. It's not all about an end goal, a pass-fail. It's how far is the product going? And then there are constant updates to keep pushing the benchmark a little further each time as well. So yeah, modulyss was actually the first flooring company to receive the new version 4 Cradle to Cradle Gold certification. That is no easy feat. So really well done. So how does this fit into our world and what we know about it? So I think most of us should know the REBA stages. Does anyone not know REBA stages? Okay, brilliant. So usually at a REBA stage, we're trying to understand the sustainability goals when we're doing the brief. We want to get the design and the specifications all right when we're selecting materials. We want to make sure that the supply chain from the contractors are going to be good and they're asking the right questions. And then we want to think about in-use, refurbishment, repairing as it goes on. But I'd like to introduce 2 more. I know, there's already enough REBA stages, but I promise this is worth it because, wait for it. So if we can get the resourcing right, this is really where we're thinking about the raw materials, what those look like, what the recycled content is, what the recyclability and disassembly is before we even get to the briefing stage. And then thinking about the end of life. What is it that we can do to avoid at all costs sending this thing to landfill? And once we get that, once we are able to do this a couple times, then we can start building it into a loop. And then it becomes a lot easier. And then it just becomes standard, right? So that's the goal. That's the ultimate goal. But it's not just designers. Everyone has to be involved. I like to say that I am trying to work myself out of a job. I do not believe that sustainability teams should exist. Why? Because I think that everyone needs to have their part to play. And if everyone doesn't have a certain part to play in sustainability, then we're not going to get it really right. And that's where the accountability and the data, what were we talking about? Transparency. That's where this all needs to play a part. Okay? So shared accountability is the key. And then I'm out of a job. So the missing link is a governance layer that keeps the data alive. So this is where I believe we're going. So we've got the DPPs becoming standard, then we're going to have real-time product data. I see this going the way, hopefully, of similar to blockchain, where there is a digital record that tracks every step in the chain of custody and remains there so that we always have that information. Then we can put that into automated ESG pipelines. It already gets reported on. It already goes to the clients and gives them what they need. and then have a dynamic comparison at the end of the day where we can really make good decisions about the products we choose. So finally, ladies and gents, what I'm asking you to do is 4 things to take away from today. The first, ask for better data. If we don't ask, we don't get. So asking for better data, specify for measurability, not just certain performance, not just colors, but for measurability. What is the quantifiable data that we need to carry on throughout? And then protect the data, protect the product. So from specification through to handover, how do we keep the data with the product? And that's what means we can keep it within the circular economy, within the chain. And finally, understand the downstream. Where is this ultimately going? What is the story that you are telling your clients and having with your clients? What's that conversation looking like? Understanding their needs and bringing it back to how we design. So, transparency is not just about proving you made a good choice. It's about enabling the next person in the chain to make one. Thank you very much. Okay, let's switch it off. Oh no, wait, I'm going to switch it back on. Okay. It's on? Great.
Thank you, Sam.
Thanks.
Do we have any questions? Q&A? Anything at all? I heard you were quite interactive.
No?
I've got a couple. Oh, here we go.
Yes.
I hear you saying that you should stick with one, and I see you chose Cradle to Cradle Certified Modulus. Can you give us a one-sentence answer about why you chose C2C?
One sentence?
Doesn't have one sentence, but I'm just saying. There's a lot to say. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Interesting that you chose that.
It's comprehensive and third-party verified. Boom! Mic drop. Actually, I'm not going to do that. Yeah, I won't do that.
Anything else at all?
What's our government doing to support this?
Sorry?
What's our government doing to support
Oh my gosh.
the question? A lot of the products we use in interiors,
Yep.
when it comes to foams and fabrics, like fire ratings, so on and so forth,
Yep.
those products really aren't sustainable, or the chemicals
Yeah.
used aren't sustainable. So what are our governments doing? There's only so much people in this room can do.
Yeah.
Our government is doing something to support that.
So I know that FIRA is looking to update their standards to reduce the amount of like halogenated flame retardants and those chemicals, especially the SVOCs. So at the moment, like a lot of those flame retardants are not categorized as necessarily too bad because it's not VOCs, it's SVOCs, which are considered less toxic, but they just are toxic, it just takes longer. It's still going to do damage in the end. But I do know that they are looking to update those standards to try and remove a lot of those chemicals, at least certainly the ones that are rated by the cancer International Cancer Forum that I'm forgetting the name of right now as probably and potentially carcinogenic. So I do know that there are things happening. The EU is moving a lot faster than the UK because the EU also has the REACH program, which is a massive registration for all chemicals out there, and that has to have a database. You cannot put a new chemical out there unless you go through that registration process. Whereas here, we did benefit from that once upon a time, and no longer. So there are things happening in the UK. It's a bit slower and it's a bit more disjointed, unfortunately.
Anyone else?
So I thought that was a really good presentation.
Thanks.
It sums up an extraordinarily difficult, complex, kind of practical thing to go and do. But I mean, one of your slides there towards the end was about shared accountability. I think from a supply chain point of view, particularly from a flooring point of view,
Yeah.
the end of the supply chain, and I think it's fair to say, even when you've got gold cradle to cradle, which, by the way, hats off, is an incredible achievement.
I mean, yeah, it's hard.
There is not the shared accountability currently in a lot of the construction industry.
No.
And the supply chain is driving the innovation and the sustainability credentials. How do you think, either from a kind of an idea going forward or your own experience working on projects, how can you raise and equal the accountability from all the stakeholders that are on that slide, from main contractors, subcontractors, clients, etc.?
Yeah. So I think, you know, looking at the way that, you know, you onboard subcontractors is a really important part of it, making sure that they are able to fulfill certain criteria, and also to ding them if they use glues. Don't use glues. I really hate the glues. But you know, having that layer of accountability and that governance in place is something that not a lot of firms have. Even, you know, we're a design and build firm, and we're still building that up to have greater accountability with our suppliers, with our supply chain, but also educating them as well, because sometimes it's just, well, we've always done it this way. Why are you now, you know, giving us, you know, a negative score on something when we didn't know that we were doing something bad in the first place? So I think it's asking the right questions a lot, and asking a lot of questions often. Cool.
Okay. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
I'll just finish off.
Oh, yeah.
More prepared words. Thank you for being part of this conversation. That's you guys. What we've discussed today makes it clear that transparency is not a fixed standard, but an ongoing responsibility for everybody. It depends on asking the right questions, challenging assumptions, and working more openly across the entire value chain. Sincere thanks to Sam for sharing her experience and for encouraging more rigorous and collaborative approach to sustainable design. We hope you've enjoyed this session. Please feel free to stay with us, enjoy a drink, have a look more about the modulyss products and the rest of the Clerkenwell. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Shane.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I'm not sure where this goes.
Amazing.
Oh, thank you,
It's been buzzing.
Yeah, I know. I kept like calling it. It's meant to be on Do Not Disturb. Yeah, I think it turned out better than I was expecting.
Just goes to show there's more transparency than we think.
Yes. But
I know. Damn, why didn't I use that?